Hello and welcome to Mind the Flat with me, Chris Heffernan.
Me, Tom Crowther.
And me, Amy Isles.
And today we're going to be discussing the greatest threat to the world. So, to start us off, we're going to think about the scariest thing that's happened in our last year and our upcoming year, as today is New Year's Eve.
How exciting.
So, Tom, thinking back, 2018, what do you think has been the scariest thing, the greatest threat to your year in 2018?
Oh God, I'm going to have to be that guy and everyone's going to sigh at this point. It was when I was doing my road trip to Mongolia from the UK.
Here we go.
Yeah, here we go. But,
Here we go.
alright, but tell me this isn't terrifying, right? Your entire car stops working, right? In the middle of nowhere, about 50 kilometres from the nearest town with no phone signal in a country where there's absolutely nobody. What do you do?
That is slightly terrifying.
Absolutely terrifying.
But to be fair, that situation was self-inflicted. You decided to go on this rally, Tom. You must put up with the consequences.
In the same way that if you walk down the road and get hit by a car, it's self-inflicted because you walked down the road.
That was really harsh.
That was harsh. That
was really harsh.
I feel like I'm just so done with Mongolia now. No offence, Tom.
Tom just said he was stuck, basically in a desert in the middle of nowhere, facing death. And you just went, self-inflicted.
Self-inflicted.
Yeah.
Sorry, Tom.
Like facing death. Like one time, guys came up to us with giant rocks in their hands and tried to scope us out. So,
I think Tom, hands down, has won. Whatever you're going to say,
No,
the greatest threat to Tom's world in 2018 was pretty significant.
Yeah, pretty much life and death. I'm just jealous because I can't compare to that. That's
Go
what
on.
it is, really, Tom. Don't worry.
What's yours?
I don't know. I honestly can't think. I think mine was probably like before I came back to uni this year. I remember like a couple of weeks before and the first couple of weeks of uni, I felt so stressed just because I didn't know what I wanted to do in my future. And like obviously it's final year for us. It's quite a scary time anyway. And I've got a work placement that I need to do next term that I'm in the process of sorting out, and I felt like I should have had it sorted by that point, and I was just getting so stressed over like, oh my gosh, haven't got any experience, like I'm never going to be able to find a work placement, I don't know what I'm going to do my whole future, and it was just like this mass feeling of panic going into third year. But it's all okay now. I'm getting it sorted. We're plowing on through.
Good.
Perfect.
Chris?
I think I'm going to go for while I was camping in Croatia. I mean, camping itself is quite a big deal for me. On one night, we had the most almighty thunderstorm I think I've ever witnessed. I don't like thunderstorms when I'm in a house, let alone when I've got a piece of fabric above me. And then a lot of trees, and the wind was howling. It's pitch black, so you can't see anything outside. You can just sense that the wind is battering your tent. I admittedly hadn't put the guy ropes in the right direction, and so the front was coming forward. The wind's battering from the front. The rain's coming in. You've got massive flashes of lightning. The thunder. It feels like it's it's right above you, and you can just sort of sense. And you
surrounded by metal poles.
It just
like,
felt
not great.
very overwhelming. And yeah, not something I think I'd like to experience again.
Not a happy camper there, Chris.
No, the rest of it, Croatia, sunshine camping, fine. Yeah. Thunderstorm camping,
not fun.
Not so fun for me.
Boom, boom, boom. Mind the flat. Boom, boom, boom.
Okay then. On with the show. What is the greatest threat to the world? Right, we're going to start us off with the obvious one. Climate change.
Hey. That's all the applause you're getting, Chris.
Go on then, what's your argument for climate change being the biggest threat?
Well, I think what I just need to say is climate change is just going to destroy the world. There will be no world if we continue going the way we're going.
Okay.
There will be nowhere for us to live as humans. The human world will be destroyed. The natural world will be destroyed. The animal world, the fish world, we're going towards ultimate Earth destruction.
Okay, and is that an immediate threat? Like the full destruction of everything, is that an immediate threat? Obviously, there are significant immediate threats that we must face. Like, there's going to be a massive climatic change that's going to cause disasters across the world. But are those disasters going to see the end of the world in the next 100 years? Or are they going to see the end of the world in the next 1,000 years? Are we on that path immediately? Or are we on a destructive path far in the future?
I think we're very much on an immediate path to the destruction of the world as we know it. I mean, if the temperatures increase, this is not just like your small islands in the Pacific that are going to be affected by sea level rises. Potentially, in less than 100 years, we could have between 0.8 and 2 meters of sea level rise, which would mean you would lose the US East Coast. By 2045, a quarter of Boston could be underwater. That's going to cause massive problems for that one country, which is going to have repercussions across the world. So yes, you've got lots of Pacific islands that are already, their worlds are being destroyed. If you look at the Bikini Islanders, who were already put on this island because of, I believe, nuclear testing, they've been put on this island, and now that island is no longer habitable because the sea levels have risen and you can no longer live on that land. So that's 300 people whose world has changed. So to them, you could say that climate change has already been the greatest threat to their world. Their world is no longer there. Their small little world of that island. But then if you wanted to look bigger, and you go to the US, which I think we'd all agree is one of the big nations, they're looking at within 100 years, things could potentially end up, you'd lose the US East Coast.
Can we not do things to adapt and change that? Like, technology is advancing at such a fast rate. Will there not become solutions to these problems in the near future?
Yeah, I mean, like, look at the rate of technology, like technological growth. You've got like processing power as a rule of thumb. I think it's called Moore's law. Like doubles every year. And so, as we don't know what technologies will exist in 10 years' time. I mean, we've already seen like incredible battery technology improvements. We're looking at like real important green technology growth. And if we just continue on the path that we're on, we don't need to deviate much from the status quo for it not to be a massive leap. I mean, obviously we need to put a concerted effort in, but I don't see it as being something that's terribly hard to do. I think it's something that is like, it's quite an attainable, and if we put our minds to it, quite an easy thing to solve. And so I don't see it as like a great threat in that sense.
And there is becoming a wider consciousness about global warming, climate change, etc. already. Like, you can see within our generation, it's becoming more and more popular to use, and it's silly, like it's little things like use reusable straws, use reusable bottles. There's been a massive trend towards that lately. And is that shift happening so rapidly that it will undoubtedly have a positive effect and extend that time scale so it's not so immediate?
Doesn't our need to do all this, our enthusiasm for doing all this, further the case that this is a great threat? That we're doing all this because we realise how severe this threat is. And so therefore our need, our desire to do things, to take action, doesn't make it less of a threat. It emphasises this is a threat and we need to do something about it.
It does, but it also shows that it's a manageable threat, does it not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's something that we can do something about. It's not going to stop the negative impacts, but it will slow them down and give us more time. And as we were saying, as technology advances, maybe we will find some like more permanent solutions to these problems.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, and I feel like it's the greater the difference, like the more we have to change from what we're currently doing determines the greater threat. Because if we continue doing what we're doing at the same pace, it won't be a threat. Or it still will be a threat, but it won't be a society-ending threat in the next 100 years if we continue to change the way we're changing things at the moment. But if we look,
I don't think we are changing enough.
No, we're definitely not. No, and I definitely
if we
agree
go at
that
the
we're
rate
not.
we're going, this is not going to get
Yeah.
solved.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we need pretty immediate change in order. I mean, we're already going to see significant negative impacts from what we've already done.
I think we can already see. We've just had a summer in which we had about 3 months of non-stop sunshine. I mean, in 2003, I believe around something like 70 to 90,000 premature deaths because of the heat. So I don't know the statistic for this heat wave, but with each heat wave that is part of the changing climate change, we are losing lives. It's happening right now. That's a lot of people that are dying because of what we're doing to the climate around us. So those people's worlds have been completely changed.
Yeah.
Like you can
That's
look at
talking about very particular worlds though. Like it is, in terms of talking about worldwide population, it is quite a small. And I'm not belittling that experience, but it is quite a small percentage when considering it in terms of the world.
Well, I think one thing to consider, like in Chris's favour, is that the people that are most negatively affected by climate change are the people that have the least in this world. Like people in like Southeast Asia that are going to see like massive tsunamis, people in sub-Saharan Africa that are going to suffer from droughts. It's not just like, if anything, people in the UK and people in America and Western Europe, we're going to be pretty cushy. Like we might have to move home, but fundamentally we're not going to die from disease and famine as quickly, which is why I think it's quite a sad position to take, but I feel like that's why it's not a world threat yet, because there are still people that would. I'm not advocating that we should do nothing about it, because like these people desperately need help, but I don't see it as like a world-ending threat, because humanity will still survive the end of that. Like we will still continue regardless of who it is that's left.
But what about if you go from a different angle then? So I believe up to 95% of the Great Barrier Reef has been affected by coral bleaching.
Yeah, that is a travesty.
So you've lost that natural world. Again, a small world, but I mean this is happening. We are losing animals. We're losing habitats. We are. If you're taking a very sort of humanitarian-centric look on what it means to lose the world, but I think the thing that makes climate change so severe is it affects everyone. It's not just humanity. It is a threat that affects animals, plants, and humans. It is all of us, all together, who are being affected by this. It doesn't just affect one group. And I think, yes, there are certain people that are more severely affected, but I think everywhere will see the repercussions of climate change. Okay, so that is my case for climate change.
So I'd argue for an even bigger threat that global warming kind of stems from, in a way, and similarly affects all of the world, but is probably more human-centric. And I think the biggest threat to the world currently is overpopulation. As we've kind of touched on, overpopulation does contribute massively to global warming and environmental effects, and also the economic effects of overpopulation are huge and massively detrimental to both society, the natural world, and humankind in general.
But does it have to? Does it have to use fossil fuels? If we invested in renewable energy, then population growth. If we didn't use fossil fuels, if we didn't have a world in which we were contributing to climate change, then the population would increase, and it would just put more of a strain on renewable energy sources. We'd invest more in renewable energy sources, and therefore there would be no consequences on global warming.
I think there is a drive towards that in a minute, but I think currently we are so reliant on fossil fuels and they are just running out, and I think the rate that population is increasing by is too much to be able to kind of keep up with fossil fuels, and I think it's likely that we're going to run out of fossil fuels before we can find alternative solutions. I think that's the worry.
Okay, so slightly deviating from the climate change perspective, because I think we've had a lot on that, I'd say that like looking at the rate of growth, as I alluded to earlier on, like looking at the rate of growth of technology, if that's going to be a useful argument against Chris's case, I think it's possibly going to be a useful argument against your case from my perspective, because technology is growing so fast, we don't know what the solutions are going to be. But I mean, technology can help us live in previously like unattainable climates, like in like desert situations and that sort of thing. Like most of the world has absolutely no humans on it, and as technology grows, like we can have infrastructure that supports living in these areas, which means that we can, rather than kind of concentrate further into the places that we currently are in, we can build infrastructure, build settlements in places that previously didn't have that level of kind of sustainability.
Yeah, I think that's, and obviously I use this argument against Chris, but by using that argument, we're relying an awful lot on stuff that we don't know. We're presuming that in the future we are going to have this magical technology. And yes, I know the evidence currently suggests that technology is going to advance at such a rate that there are going to be new solutions to these problems. But it's still an if. It's still not a definite. It's still not a, we are going to have this technology, everything's going to be fine because something's just going to pop up in the future. We're not magicians, we can't see into the future, and we don't know. We don't know what technologies are going to develop and whether they are going to be able to provide appropriate solutions. And it's a massive if.
Yeah, ultimately it is an if, but it is I think it's quite a safe assumption, because like at the rate that it is growing, and it will consider the rate, not only is it currently growing exponentially, but the rate will continue to grow faster and faster, which means that but
we as a population are also growing faster and faster.
But the rate that technology is growing at is far outstrips population growth. I mean, I had a look on the UN report, the most recent one, and it predicts that by 2100, so the beginning at the turn of the next century, we're going to be looking at about somewhere between 11 and 12 billion people, which I don't think is a massive departure from, like, it's a significant increase from what we've got now, but in 100 years or near enough 100 years, that's not a massive amount of growth compared to where technology could be bringing us in that amount of time. And I think it's such an incomparable difference that I think that it's almost certain to say that we will be able to come up with the technologies, like statistically certain to say that we'll come up with the technologies to be able to do something about that climate growth and that population growth.
But again, it's a could.
Technology growth is an if, in the same way that population growth is an if. We don't know that population will continue to increase in exactly the same way that we don't know that technology will.
Because if you look at the demographic transition model, as you go along in development, death rate decreases first, then birth rate decreases. Hence, sort of populations in, I know we've said before these words aren't ideal words, but the developed word using inverted commas, birth rate has declined, and so therefore population has more levelled out. There are many concerted efforts to increase education and the use of contraception, not just for the purposes of controlling population, but for improving economic development, health. There's many other reasons for having education and contraception, but they're going to have a counter effect on human populations, and that therefore gradually families that used to have maybe 6 to 10 children will now have less. A, because they have access to contraception, and B, health has improved, and so therefore you don't need to have as many children because you know more of them are going to survive. So therefore so you could have a complete levelling out. Population doesn't necessarily have to continue to increase as it's doing, because with the advances
but it will still increase. Like, I think that's...
Well, will it?
But you can't say that for certain.
Oh, shut up. You're making arguments against me.
I think that's the thing. That the advances in technology, and as people become... If we have this ideal world, if the UN's Millennium Goals, many of which they failed on, but if we keep pursuing them, we will see dramatic levellings out of population growth, and so therefore population growth won't be a problem. It won't exist, because history would show that once you have higher levels of education, better levels of health, and easier access to contraception, birth rates do level out.
But is this going to happen in time? Like,
but in time for what?
Well, the same way as global warming, like in time to save humanity, I guess.
Well, I guess the thing is with population though is that it's a lot more of like an equilibrium balancing thing.
Absolutely.
Like you can see increases happening and then you can tackle them. Whereas with the delay of climate change, you can't see like we've already affected the world so much that we don't see the effects until 50 years after we started pumping, or 100 years after we started pumping things into the atmosphere. And so we can't have that kind of relationship where we balance our behaviour based on what we've seen in the same way that we can with population growth, which is a lot more immediate.
Yeah, but doesn't population growth contribute directly to global warming? So
It contributes to global warming, but therefore it's a feeder into the greater threat, which is climate change. Increases in population is a sub-threat to climate change.
Okay.
Because it's not the only driver of climate change. So just as our use of fossil fuels drives climate change, increasing population drives climate change.
I think that's probably a nice segue into moving on to the final topic then. I'm going to make my argument in favour of artificial intelligence or automation. I'm not talking necessarily conscious artificial intelligence, but such developed machine learning that it can cause a significant threat to humanity. That's going to be my argument here. What we've got already in terms of machine learning, like we've seen the impact on like election rigging and that sort of thing. We've got cyber warfare that is now taking prominence over physical warfare. I mean, look at what the Russians did. Apparently, the Russians they used, not only did they use Facebook advertising through machine learning to target specific parts of America over the 2016 election, they also created events for people of different viewpoints, and they created these events so that they would come together. So, for example, some people pro-immigration, so some people anti-immigration, and they create those events just to kind of polarize society and rip it apart. And I think the problem there is that at the moment we've got people doing this. People are creating these algorithms that are running and developing, and they have these goals. But the issue that we have with artificial intelligence as it becomes more and more sophisticated is what happens if we don't set appropriate parameters. So, for instance, like if we say we want this artificial intelligence to better society and create a better society, it might then go and kill half the population because the best thing to do is to stop things like climate change or to feed the world's hungry and whatnot is to get rid of half the people. And it might take those arguments so literally that it causes a significant problem to humanity.
But artificial intelligence is still in its infancy, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean relatively, but what we've achieved so far with the limited progress that we have made is quite significant. Like look at IBM's Watson and what it can do now. It can you can use it to beat people playing games like chess. You can use it to. I think they're trying to implement it into medical environments, trying to make it so that it can diagnose and that sort of thing. And it's becoming so pervasive now, and we don't even realise that's another problem. Like we don't even realise what it's doing. We can't see that, and we also fundamentally the way that machine learning works is we don't understand how it works. We can't understand how it works because what we do is we create a set of keys and we say this is the outcome, and then what you need to do is you need to keep replicating yourself until you do achieve this outcome best. And we don't know how it does that and how it makes those rules to achieve that outcome, but it evolves almost. It destroys itself and recreates itself until it gets to this completely able algorithm that creates this outcome.
This might sound like such a stupid argument because I don't really know a lot about AI, but surely there's an off button that when we do realise, you can just be like, nope, stop in there.
So my argument is effectively that we're unlikely to be able to set the parameters so specifically so that it doesn't accidentally do something stupid. We can't say everything that we don't want it to do because it's almost an infinite list of things we don't want it to do. But in sandboxing it, what we're trying to do is make it so that if it does go wrong, we can stop it. But hackers nowadays can find the bugs in pretty much any program. Even the most sophisticated developers and the most complicated software always has bugs because it's created by humans. So if we create a sandbox, right, that encloses this AI, but this AI is superhuman in its intelligence, surely it will be able to find any bugs that we put in it, any bugs that is in that sandbox, and then pretty much just escape and destroy everything or do what it wants to do. It might not destroy everything immediately, but as soon as it escapes, it's free, and we can't then rebox it. We have one. That's the big scary thing for me, is that we've got one chance to get this right. if someone makes one intelligent AI that can self-replicate and can do this sort of thing, then we don't have another shot. That's it.
But what can... So you're talking about AI at the minute, like it's got limbs.
That's
and
what
it
I'm
can do
thinking.
Absolutely
Sort of,
anything.
yeah.
Okay.
Like, in terms of technology, yeah, I can see it's going to affect us massively if it shuts down the internet, for example. That's a really simplistic and stupid example, but it is going to mess us up. But I mean, it can't. It's not like War of the Worlds where it just like takes over.
Shoots people.
Yeah.
Well, fundamentally, like, the problem that we face isn't that it's going to come at us physically. It's that we're not going to know that it's coming at us. It's that we've got... It's quite an insidious risk. It's like... So it could start subtly, like fake news, and I like what the Russians did, but we don't know who's doing it. We don't know that it's being done. We can't point a finger at anyone. Like fake news, rigging elections, crippling economies, that sort of thing. Like,
But how can it do this?
how can it do this? Because it can. Because
can get
everything
into
now is done through technology, and this is why I genuinely think this is a bigger threat than your things. Because the solution to your problems is technology. The solution to climate change is better technology. The solution to overpopulation is better technology. But the solution to this is not better technology. That is the problem.
A solution to climate change doesn't have to be better technology.
Oh, well, fundamentally, in like the position
That might
we're
be
in,
the ideal version, but it doesn't have to be the only.
As with population
I don't
growth.
think that we could adequately tackle the problem of climate change to the degree that it needs to be done if we don't use technology. If we with what we've got at the moment and the habits that we're in as a society, I don't think that we can stop climate change without the use
But
of
would we
technology.
need to use artificial intelligence technology?
But that's the thing, like, technology is networked. Like, technology isn't... You don't create one technology in isolation from another technology. You create one technology and someone goes, oh, that's a great idea for that. I'm going to use some of that in my technology, and someone else is going to do that. And then technology grows organically, but together as a network. And you can't just say green technology is completely different from AI, because they're not. They feed into one another.
It's such a broad subject as well. Like we say technology, like phones, laptops, the internet, but like it is so much more than that. Like
Yeah,
it's not
it's-
that simplistic.
It's the tills at the shop.
Exactly,
It's
yeah.
all your banking. Like, imagine like banking as well. That's controlled. I mean,
Yeah.
yes, it's encrypted, and humans can't necessarily break that encryption. But who's to say that an exponentially growing intelligent being is not going? I say being, but entity maybe is not going to be able to break those encryptions in 10, 15 years' time after it's created if it continues to grow constantly in intelligence.
I feel like we should just stop all technology. I think we should go back to quills, feathers. We'll take our
Back
podcast.
to Downton Abbey.
We'll take our podcast onto the streets. We'll ring a bell. Oh yay! Oh yay! Oh yay! And we'll just hold our podcast on the street to whoever's listening. That would solve climate change and then AI as well, because that's terrifying.
But would it solve population growth? Would
Yeah,
it?
because we could educate people on the streets.
I'm still sticking with population growth because I think that's
But I
such
think
a contributing factor.
I think if population growth stopped today, if the population stopped growing today, I don't think climate change would become less of a problem.
No, I agree with you, but I think the fact that it is a problem is caused by the past population growth. If we'd have stayed at 1.6 billion as in 1900, we wouldn't be at the climate change wouldn't be in the state that it is today.
To me, the way to look at it is, and it's an idea of semantics, really, I think, is I would say that if the population continued to grow from the start in a sustainable way, if we'd never used fossil fuels,
But we have.
but if we hadn't, population could have continued to grow, and there wouldn't have been a problem. So it's not to do with the population growing, it's because of what we're like as humans, because we've exploited resources and caused climate change, that population growth is a problem. If we'd never discovered fossil fuels, and we'd never started polluting the atmosphere, and we'd started with renewable energies from the start, the population could have kept growing, and it would never have contributed to climate change. It only contributes to climate change. It only is a threat because it contributes to climate change.
But I think part of the reason for population growth has been discovering those. I think they're inextricably linked. I think discovering those fossil fuels and exploiting them has led to population growth.
Can we then maybe conclude on this point then that the things we're talking about are incredibly complex and interlinked, and fundamentally the biggest threat to humanity is just humanity.
It's humanity itself. Well, actually, the biggest threat to the world is humanity, not just humanity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think
humans are destroying the world.
that's what the dodo would say.
I think we can pretty
This is
much
very
agree
true.
on that. I think all of us
Yeah.
are probably like. I mean, even my one, like
I think they all
artificial
know-
intelligence is created in at least to start with by human development.
So the biggest threat to the world is artificial intelligence, population growth, climate change, which are all sub-contributors to humanity. So there you go, everyone. As we go into 2019,
This is
The-
just happy start
Wow,
to the new
what a
year.
depressing way to start.
as you go into 2019, as you listen to the fireworks, as we welcome in a brand new year, just remember, you are part of humanity, and you are responsible for the destruction of this world.
Let's hope we see another year out, hey guys.
Thank you very much for listening.
If you want to get in contact, you can find us on Facebook. We're Mind the Flat Podcast.
On Twitter, we're at mindtotheflat_pod.
On Instagram at mindtheflat_podcast.
And if you want to respond to anything we've said in this episode or suggest a topic for another week, you can head to our Reddit, that's r/mindtheflat, and have your say there, or you can drop us an email at mindtheflatpodcast@gmail.com.